One beautiful morning, Gautam Buddha had gone for a walk with his caretaker disciple Ananda. It was fall time. Trees were almost getting naked, and all the leaves were on the path, and the wind fluttering the trees and the leaves were making beautiful sounds. Walking on those leaves, Buddha was immensely happy. The music of the dry leaves he took few leaves in his hand. Ananda asked him, I have been always thinking to ask one thing, but privacy is so difficult. You are always surrounded by people. Today you are alone in this forest. I cannot resist the temptation. I want to ask you, have you said everything to us, or have you kept some secrets? Buddha said, do you see the leaves in my hand? And do you see the leaves all over the forest? Ananda said, yes, I do see. But I don't understand that is the answer. Buddha said, you will understand. I have said only this much, and I have kept secret all these leaves that are in the whole forest. My situation is just different. I have said the whole forest. Only one thing I have kept secret. Just one leaf. Buddha had declared before his death that he will be coming after 25 centuries. And his name will be Maitreya. The Maitreya means the friend. Buddhas don't come back. No enlightened person ever comes back. So it is just a way of saying. What he is saying is of tremendous importance. It has nothing to do with his coming back. He cannot come back. What he means is that the ancient relationship between the master and the disciple will become irrelevant in 25 centuries.
So, tradition versus non-tradition. So I was thinking, like, there's a couple of ways to approach this, but maybe you want to kick it off because, as I said, I'm a bit low energy. I want to hear what you got to say about it, in general terms.
Okay, can you
Yeah. So, sure. Do you want to kick us off? Tradition versus non-tradition. Yeah, just in a general sense, maybe what we're getting at, things to consider. It's a big topic.
Okay.
Yeah, big topic.
Well, if you're guys like us, or you're listening to this, probably you are doing some type of practices, whether they're, it's like self-development stuff or spiritual practices or something like this. You're trying to change yourself in some way, improve yourself, or have an awakening or whatever it is you're interested in. The first thing you come across is there's hundreds of different things to do from all different places. There's techniques, methods, cures, treatments, all these things. So the problem you have is which one to do. So the first thing is some of them are good, some of them are bad, but everyone says their thing is the best and the other ones are rubbish. So you have to decide which ones are good, which ones are bad, and then you have to find which ones are suitable to you. That there might be several that are good, but you're more suited to doing one of them, or you can only find a practitioner in your local area, or you just have access to one of these techniques, just by luck or whatever. So what you'll find is you start playing with different techniques, doing different practices, you're reading books, and you're just experimenting with stuff, and then you're not really sure what ones to do. And then you'll come across the kind of debate that goes on between people sometimes about whether you should be doing one set of practices that are embedded within one proper tradition, and you stick to that and you go really deep on that, or whether you can just pick and mix different practices from different traditions, different cultures, different countries, and get them to work together for you individually. So if you have if you go down the traditional route, everything's already there for you, depending on which version of which tradition. Obviously, there's lots. They'll have everything from specific practices to do with ethical rules and other kind of things that come with it, and all go together, and it kind of works as a system. Or you can just take one of the practices out and do it on your own and see what happens. People get success with both of them. Some people prefer one more to the other. Some people are really hardcore about one or the other. It's different for different people. I've alternated between the both viewpoints throughout my life in different ways, and I've been more into one or the other. There's pros and cons of each, and I've kind of came to some kind of synthesis for myself, which we'll maybe talk about later. But I'd be interested to know the kind of things what kind of things are you doing that would be classified as under one specific tradition, and what kind of things are you just picking and mixing from different places, or integrating things together, or how do you think about these things, Alex?
I'd say that first of all, I'm a heretic in many ways. Second of all, before I say what I'm going to say, I don't have anything against religion. I just want to make that clear. I know a lot of religious guys, like online. I know several Buddhist monks, other people like that. I got nothing but respect for people that choose to undertake something like that. So if you're one of those people, please don't get offended by anything I say. But I do practice Zazen, and I have probably for a long time. That includes going to sessions, working with a master, having a relationship, with a master, in terms of like learning, higher levels of things, if there is such a thing in Zen, which is probably a bad way to put it, but at least taking my studies more seriously. So what I've found over the years is that my view on these religious traditions is that they offer you a foundation or something to hold on to as you go through the process that the esoteric material, not the exoteric material or the material of the religion itself, but the esoteric experiential material, particularly in a path like Buddhism. And I guess it's the same with yogas and Hinduism, even Christianity. I guess if you're a monk or you do, say, the work of what's his name, Loyola, which includes meditations. So anything in the more esoteric realm, I feel like you're undergoing a process of change. There are certain rules that you follow during this change that are usually designed to make that process easier. And the religious form, so the clothes, the prayers, the words, the rules, the ethics, all the accoutrement, I think that they offer you something to hang on to, because a lot of the time the process that you undergo can be quite challenging and quite difficult. It's not just a walk in the park, well, not if you do it properly. You do have to confront certain things, and certain energies come up that may be less than pleasant. Having said all of that, for someone like me, and you're probably the same from what I'm gathering, over the years, I've come to the understanding that the religions themselves, in my opinion, can actually get in the way of what they're trying to achieve. And the way it does this, and I've spoken about this before, but it's this idea of spiritual materialism path, and you get really tied up with the traditions and the rules and all these other things that you become attached to them. You become attached to them in a way that someone's attached to watching football on a Saturday. It's really no different. So, you see all these hippies, they go to festivals, do yoga, and they've got like dreadlocks and they all look the same way. They wear the same clothing. This kind of thing, this spiritual materialism, is just basically kind of adopting another type of personality. And if the aim of the work is self-understanding, I think that very often the religious element can get in the way of that process if you're not very careful. It doesn't necessarily have to, but what I find that it does tend to in the people that I've known. So, pardon me, the way I tend to view it is that the esoteric elements or the practices can absolutely be taken away from the religious exoteric rules and accoutrement if you have the necessary degree of maturity to be able to do it. Because if you think about it, and this is probably where I'm a bit more radical, but at least with, say, mindfulness practices, so in Zen or Tibetan Buddhism or various other things, as long as there's no explicit cultural references to the practice, which, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's deity worship and deity yoga and various other things of that nature. And that's the case in Hinduism and Vedanta, generally. As long as it's not explicit, the core of the practice itself is not a verbal or concept-based thing. I feel that you should be able to rip away all that stuff, and the process is still there regardless of how you dress it up with verbiage or whatever else. So my view these days is that pretty much all of the material I've come across, so whether that's okay, let me be careful with this. A lot of the mindfulness type material, absolutely. A lot of the meditation work, like higher Tibetan meditation work with pointing exercises, glimpse exercises, it can be secularized. And I know people fucking hate to hear that. Like and I'm going to cop all sorts of flack for saying this, but you can absolutely do it. There's absolutely no reason why it needs to be in a tradition to be done. I think the same can be said of yoga. I mean, we've spoken about how someone like Reich appropriated certain yogas from the East or certain ways of breathing, changed them up a little bit, kind of adapted them to what he was doing. There's no reason why these processes in the body that should be mostly objective should be bound by rules or regulations or tradition or religion. And the way that I view tradition in general, as someone who has a soft spot for it, for example, like I like the Zen aesthetic. I like the Christian aesthetic. I like the way this stuff looks. I think there's an element of that to it as well. But I think that beyond that, there's no feature that is not of the delusion that you're trying to cut away ultimately in these practices. And therefore, they can be amalgamated in your own conception of things to do your own thing as you see fit or as is required, because they all have different ways of working and they do different things to you. So mindfulness is going to do something different to posture work. Breathing is going to emphasize, something a little bit different again. And it's the true value, I think, comes when you are sufficiently competent in these things. And maybe you can learn these things in a tradition. But when you're sufficiently competent where you can pick and choose what you want to use for a specific purpose. And I think that traditions can be a crutch, and I think they can get in the way. And what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So I've interviewed a lot of traditionalist philosophers on my channel because I do have a soft spot for it. I like some of the philosophy, but I do consider religion to be very much like a personal matter. I don't really feel like it should be a political platform or anything like that. So in a personal sense, like I've got nothing against following a path for some people. But one of those philosophers, I think it was Harry, who I had on the show, he said that tradition is a living, breathing, alive thing. It's not something from the past. It's not something that existed sometime before that you're taking and doing your own version of. It's something that is always present, always exists, and is always renewed. And in that sense, I feel like traditions can probably get in your way if you're trying to get into that state of being yourself. Like a lot of it, particularly these days for Westerners, I feel like it's LARPing. You're kind of LARPing. Like particularly, for example, if you're doing Tibetan Buddhism and you're a dude from California who surfs and you had a Protestant upbringing and your entire family's blonde, and you go to a Tibetan play, like it looks all sexy and exotic and cool, but what the fuck do you know about Tibetan deities or the cultural relevance of these things or the meanings of the symbols or the language or anything else? And the answer to that is you don't know and you never will. Nevertheless, behind all that stuff is something useful. The meditation techniques are useful. Some of them are very sophisticated, and the ones that are good can be separated from that tradition. Absolutely. So I'm ranting a bit there, but those are my general thoughts. I don't think that any of this work needs to be bound by a conception of tradition or what we thought was the case hundreds of years ago, which probably wasn't the case anyway. And we don't understand the language or the nomenclature or the context or anything like that. But maybe practicing for a little while in a tradition, you get the knack for what the practice is. You start to understand it on a non-verbal level, on a non-rule-based level, and you can just take it away. Like I have taken tons of things away from all different kinds of things and mixed it in. And So far, I haven't had demons come up and threaten me to send me to Buddhist hell or Hindu hell or Christian hell. Like, so far, it hasn't happened. So yeah, those are my general thoughts on traditions and practices and separating them. I don't think
what you said there was,
yeah.
you brought up an interesting thing about the difference between exoteric and esoteric.
Yeah.
Because when people are thinking of traditions or religions or any kind of spiritual path, they tend to think of it as one thing that just it's like this one thing, and then you take the things out of. But actually, they grow and develop in their own ways, and often it's like it's the esoteric practices that came first, and then the exoteric stuff and the social stuff was attached later after.
Yeah.
Often that keeps the esoteric stuff away from the normal people, because normal people don't really want this stuff. This is like a weirdo stuff. This is weirdo things.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, as the tradition builds and the exoteric but gets stronger, they also are playing around and experimenting and coming up with new esoteric practices. But there's always the kind of tension between those two sides of in the traditions. So when you approach one, it's already determined by your approach is already determined by your personality type, whether you're looking for rigid, fixed rules to just follow and not have to think about it, or whether you're more like free expressing kind of person and you're trying to add in all these different experiences. Whether you're just in you're going whether you're getting involved or interested in that tradition in order to learn esoteric practices. I mean, that might be the thing that you're doing, or are you going there for the social stuff? You know, I mean, they're both fine for different people. It's not, but it's not the same thing necessarily. Most people listening to this are probably interested in the practices first. So, like one of the things people struggle with is, do you do the? They often, especially in the West, everyone just ignores the local practices or the tradition they're from and look for something more exotic. For different reasons. So, and then one thing, people who do that and they'll jump around the world and try all these different things and they eventually return back to their native tradition and realize there's esoteric practices within it also. That's quite common. You hear that from people. As far as the you said about whether you can extract the practice if there's nothing explicit about that culture in the practice. It's true for a lot of stuff, but you still have to transform it into your own way of understanding, because even if you get rid of all like names of gods and all that kind of stuff, the basic concepts those practices are built on top of or around are a lot of times unique to that culture. So the practice is a kind of, there's a conceptual framework or way of understanding the world in that culture, and then the practices are they're kind of a way of enacting or expressing that understanding, that way of viewing the world, that world feeling, is the Spengler would call it. So like, the Tai Chi practices, you're not just doing these movements, you're actually enacting an understanding of energy and how the world works and how things are connected. That's part of that. That's part of that way of viewing the world. So you can pluck out the practice and do it, but I don't know if it's possible to get everything that they're getting. So it's like it's LARPing to pretend that you're going to get it the same way, because you've grown up in a different place, you've different climate, different genetics, different upbringing, all these things. So you can pluck it out and use it, but you won't get everything. But that's okay if you know that that's what's happening. So then you have to transform it and make it become part of your own understanding, which is something you see a lot of people doing. They'll, the mindfulness version you'll get in the East is a bit different from the typical mindfulness you'll find in a corporate training seminar. It's not going to be the same things, or like even the the high tech Silicon Valley bro investigators of Vipassana and all that kind of stuff. So they're already transforming it and making it a bit different. So even if they don't think they are, as far as like whether the practice works as well or not, I think that's just something people have to experiment with, because a lot of the different traditions will have a similar practice. They're the same idea, not the same idea, the same they're basically the same kind of practice, but they're like going at it from different angles and stuff. And different people, they'll click differently for different people. And most people who've been doing things for a while will have some weird synthesis of practices, even within a tradition. They'll, like, even if they're within one tradition, they're doing this practice and this other practice and combining them and emphasizing different things in different ways than somebody else who's also in that tradition. It really isn't one thing like that. And often some of the best new stuff comes by people just mixing two separate things. They just find that one thing works a little bit, another thing works, and they just plug them together, and then like a new practice will be born, which could be a new tradition over time or whatever. So
which is
it is alive like that.
Yeah,
and we're at sort of this mad, cutting edge, messy time where everything's just been mixed in together and stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if a few things emerge that become the next settled tradition that, you know, a few hundred years, that's something that started around now. But it just seems so messy and everyone's just picking random stuff just now.
I think I agree. The other important thing to do is what I notice a lot of people, including myself for many years, is that I don't think I ever defined what I was trying to do. So I think there's one element of traditions that can help, because all traditions have an endpoint. Like in Buddhism, it's enlightenment. You know, Hinduism, what is it in Christianity? I guess, well, going to heaven. But for a monk or something, it's finding grace. Is that what they call it? Grace? Anyway, whatever they call it.
It'll depend it depends which tradition within Christianity. I mean, Christianity is, like, as far as I'm concerned, it's a separate religion. It's multiple religions. It's not even one religion.
But
I mean, that's already controversial for people. But it just, like, you know, I'm from the far north of Scotland, and the churches I've been to there are nothing like the churches that you get here in Cyprus, Greek Orthodox style. They're just completely different, even if it's based on the same scriptures. You know, religion is more than just the scripture, which is what we're talking about. They have very different esoteric practices, actually.
For sure. So
both as well, they're like both the exoteric and esoteric are very different. They just appear to be the same, a continuation, same thing. Anyway,
I was just going to say, so the orthodoxy is quite mystical. I don't know much about it, but it's more mysticism based. It doesn't make as much legalistic effort as Western Christianity seems to. From the little I understand, it's just what I've heard. I'm not one of these orthodox bros that converts every 3 years.
In it and mystical, not just the practices, but also mystical concepts, like a way of understanding that is much more central. Obviously, in Northern Europe, you know, there's like all the Catholic monks, different groups that are doing mystical stuff, and Protestant mysticism is a bit different. You know, it's more
working.
It's like secret societies and occultism and stuff is really Protestant mysticism.
Yeah, okay.
Even if they appear anti-Christian, I mean, they're like a lot of those things that people think of as occultism and they think they're opposites actually are just esoteric Protestantism in a way. This is going to annoy people, but the Catholic esoteric stuff, obviously, it's more obvious. It's like the monks and it's more easy to see. There's monastery. I visited a monastery the other day when I was in Greece. Monasteries everywhere. Here, it's like part of the culture almost, in a way that they're not. They're like they really are weirdos in the UK now, out separate. Here, it's more kind of just normalized in a different way. So if you're like interested in esoteric practices, which one you go to will make a difference. I tried at different times to try and commit to a different tradition and things like this, but it just never worked for me. Because I was interested in the practices. Like you, I didn't really know why I was doing it or what I was wanting. You just have this kind of need. You're just like a seeker. You don't know what you're seeking, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of pick up an intuition of what's working and what's not if you're not an idiot over time, but you can waste so much time. The tradition will restrict you if you're trying to rigidly fix everything into to make sense of the kind of maps they've given you.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't really make, you kind of limit what's happening, or you stunt the growth that is already happening organically, and you stunt it because you're trying to rigidly fix it into this step-by-step map that you were expecting intellectually to happen. We're getting into this aligns with the Ian McGilchrist book that we were talking about last week.
For sure. Yeah.
Left and right hemispheres.
Everything does. Right.
So there's that's another thing about the practices and which techniques and stuff is, if you're more of a right brain kind of person or left brain kind of person, you're going to be attracted to different things. And the one that you're more suited to you'll enjoy it more probably, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the one you should do to like if it's an awakening or whatever. It might not be the one. You're just going round in circles because you're just enjoying yourself, but actually you need to do something that's gets you out of your comfort zone you don't really like, and you do a lot of practices you're disliking actually until something happens. It's not so simple. I mean, and you might just grow up somewhere where you have no choice. You just have to do the local one. You're not allowed to just pick and mix like we kind of do in the West. It's not as easy in some places, and it wasn't as easy in the West at other times. But there's always like the weirdos doing the weird things, and everyone, as far as I can see, has their own version of everything. I don't think anyone is doing any strictly traditional practice anywhere.
No.
It's always slightly adapted to the current time and to that person.
Yeah, but,
if you really ask questions, there'll be slight emphasis. Even if you have to get tiny, it'll be a really small difference, and that's like their whole practice is based around this small difference that the guy next to them isn't doing, even though it looks from an outsider's point of view they're doing the same practice.
Yeah. If you track changes even in, say, Buddhism, which I know about, speaking to several historians of Buddhism, it changed just hugely. Like, it went from Scythians. Spoke to this guy called Christopher Beckwith about his book Greek Buddha. And then, this Pyrrho, Pyrrho was a Greek philosopher. He went to that area where the Buddha was a couple of hundred years after he died with Alexander the Great as a part of his retinue. And then he took probably what was some form of proto-Buddhism back to Greece and started off a whole lineage of skeptical thought. So I'm skeptical of the idea of tradition as if there's this unbroken line, although there are unbroken lines of initiation, or at least probably there are, but nevertheless, as you say, wherever it goes, it changes rapidly. And say, for example, in Central Asia, at the Buddhist monasteries, Muslims went in there to get educated, and there are a lot of similarities between esoteric Islam or the higher levels of Islamic philosophy anyway, and Buddhist philosophy. There's a ton. Like, you can't draw Allah, or you can't visually represent him. Well, it's because they went and got educated by Buddhists, and you couldn't do that with a Buddha either. Technically, he was just
also in Sufism. There's it's also intermingled with Neo-Platonist kind of practices and ideas and stuff as well. I mean, like every tradition is, if you look at it, it's like a synthesis of other older traditions kind of
Mm.
mixed together, and it kind of congealed enough into one thing for that place and time, and then it remained. And um, the life in them is usually early on, and the energy and the changing, and then they become more rigid later. And then the more rigid, bureaucratic type of personality type is attracted to the structure. They want to go to the structure, the social structure, and then start being in charge of the social structure. So they make it even more rigid and bureaucratic and rule bound. So that's not the esoteric type of person at all.
No.
They're not interested in that. They just want to either be left alone to practice, or they want the good stuff as quick as possible without having to go through the years of initiations or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's always that tension. And the good thing about now in the West is you can actually get access to the kind of hardcore practices quite quickly now. But the downside of that is it's coming with a conceptual framework that you may not fully understand, or it may conflict with other ones of you of your existing conceptual framework, and cause some kind of side effects from that. If you do one thing too heavily, people can go weird if they're just doing one practice and so on too much sometimes. Even if they're getting benefit, even if they're getting success in that practice. And then that's where the tradition would have been useful, because that would have been balanced. There'll be other practices that you might not be as interested in that you're forced to do at the same time, or not at the same time, but along, in your weekly schedule as well. You have to do these other ones, which would balance that out. That you would only do because you're in the tradition. They're making you do it. So we're losing that by the pick and mix.
True. I agree. I was just going to say, just going back to the defining terms element, because it is kind of what you're saying, right? So it's this idea that, these religions tend to have these final endpoints, enlightenment, what is it, moshka, whatever it is. And a lot of people jump into this stuff, I think mainly because in the West, we lack really any inherent spirituality. A lot of people are in pain, so they tend to jump on these things as ways out of that. But I think that not a lot of people really consider the end point of what they're doing. Like, what are you here to do? Like, do you fully comprehend what the religion is saying to you, or what the process is saying to you, and where you're going to end up? A lot of times, particularly with the Eastern religion, I think that those ultimate goals are, I wouldn't quite say antithetical, but they're not the same goals as the average Westerner can accept, in my opinion. So I think you were saying last week, the idea of like the fully enlightened dude sitting on the side of a road, like in a pair of underpants, in a Shiva pose with a bunch of skulls around his neck. I honestly don't think that's where most Westerners want to go. They probably want to live a decent life most of the time. They probably want to achieve things in life. They probably want some degree of pursuit of material. And I actually think that all these things, even though they're often shunned for higher initiates in Eastern religions, I still think that they're Western end goals. They're valid, valuable, cultural goals. And very often these religions value slightly different things. So hear me out. The practices themselves, even though they're confined to a tradition, they nevertheless have impacts on the brain and the nervous system, the way we breathe. I've been doing experiments, for a while now, measuring how different forms of meditation affect brain waves, how different forms of body work that could be considered pseudo-Hindu affect my mentality, my brain state, the way that my blood flows around my body. All these kinds of materialist metrics, including the way that my mentality is. So I keep a diary. So after a practice or doing a practice for a while, I'll write down progressively how I think it's affecting me, what I think is occurring, and what kind of impact it's having. And I guess what I'm getting at is that a lot of these practices, when taken out of the shell of their tradition or root culture, and not in their entirety necessarily, can be quite valuable for a Western person if they define what they're trying to get out of them. So, for example, instead of doing mindfulness as a compulsion because you're in pain, maybe you can go out and say, well, I have a desire to understand what I am more, and that is why I'm going to pursue this line of mindfulness. As you say, like the corporate mindfulness, it's a little bit lame, but I'm not against it either, because it probably does have a like a calming effect on people. I've spoken to a lot of people it has a calming effect on. So for a Westerner, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with picking and choosing, as long as you do it intelligently and you consider what your purpose is and define why you're doing the thing. And I feel like if you go through that process intelligently, you define, well, I want to do yoga because I feel very anxious and I'm very tight and I need to loosen up a bit. My muscles are very tense. Whatever. Then at least you know why you're doing something. And I think that's really critical when you're taking something from a culture in which that practice exists for a different specified endpoint. And I think a lot of people get in trouble when they don't consider that. And that it often doesn't get considered very deeply. So that those are my thoughts. So for example, for me, what I found is after doing mindfulness in a Zen context for a long time, when I finally got it, I realized that there are utilities to the mind state that Zen meditation induces that are just widely applicable to everything. It doesn't need to be within a Zen tradition. It's literally in everyday life that these mind states are useful for people in a myriad of ways that I won't go into. Same thing with breathing. Hatha breathing, or abdominal breathing, or tanden breathing in the Zen tradition, again, was originally a Buddhist way of breathing. They would sit in lotus and they would breathe that way. It was an esoteric practice, and there's Japanese texts that refer to it as an esoteric practice. But after some time, it went all throughout the Japanese culture, for many hundreds of years, and in many ways defined the Japanese culture's posturing to life. There's absolutely no reason why we can't take these things with a Western mind, measuring what they do to the body, measuring the psychological impact that they have on the body, and really just taking them and implementing them as we see fit, as that fits into our defined goal as practitioners, and ultimately maybe a culture one day. Because these practices like mindfulness and all these different things, they have non-religious impacts as well. So we're starting to study the brain, how these things work on the brain. There's lots of feedback on what people experience and how it makes their lives easier from day to day. All these practices are not bound to a language. They're not bound to a culture necessarily. And they can be very useful just so long as you define and understand why you're doing something and why you're using it. And increasingly, there's research on this stuff. Like if you go online, you can type in, posture, integrity, and mindfulness and anxiety response. I was reading something today on that. I was reading something on abdominal breathing, and having a stooped head that's forward, and the impact that has on the diaphragmatic process, and then in turn the impact that has on everyday behavior. So people are looking at this, and in a way you can utilize many of these practices and transplant them to fix those very things. And in that way they become a kind of new technology in and of themselves, adapted for a Western mentality and a Western end goal, which is not an Eastern end goal. We just don't culturally have the same goals as people in the East do. Like this Enlightenment thing. Yeah, I just don't think I've never really met anyone I believed who stated that as their own goal. Maybe a few people, but
It's difference of world different. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
different worldview. So it's
yeah,
it's like, or like in India, it's more like life is a dream. So the goal is to escape the dream.
yeah, yeah.
In the West, it's not that. It's like, it's more practical and physical and, expansion outward and stuff like that. So it's like people want to do things. It's
Mm,
not like right, wrong, good, bad. It's just different.
yeah.
Like I've been saying, pick and mix about picking different things. Like it's kind of derogatory. No, not really, but kind of sounds like that way. But I don't mean it like that. I just mean there's a nicer term for it. I've heard some people talking about. There's some groups online that are kind of trying to re-establish or redevelop things like Platonic dialogue and stuff like that.
Paganism
As
and
practices.
yeah.
So you know what I
Paganism.
mean? So like they're
Yeah.
they're calling it an ecology of practices. So you need to, like, different practices do different things. You need a movement practice. You need a sort of intellectual, kind of conceptual, philosophical practice. You need ones that are more social, with engagement with other people, and various other things.
Yeah.
So they're signed to be hard for that. So ecology of practices is a bit sexier name to call it, maybe.
It's a good way to put it.
So like if that's, they would maybe, I'm assuming calling it that because they're obviously thinking about the same things we are. From some people I've seen involved with that, it seems like too much on the pick and mix side, and it's just on whims of feeling. So I feel like I like this one, I'll just do that one, or they just like the aesthetics of something, so they go to that one. But over time, you kind of figure out what works. You tend to drop off the ones that are useless if you're not an idiot. You tend to find your own mix over time. As far as like movement practices, I wrote a thing a while ago about the Western, like I called it the Western ideas, like spiritual raiding. Like the Vikings just jumped in the boats and raided around and grabbed all the stuff, physical stuff from other people.
I'm going to steal that. Yeah.
Including some grabbing some of the people too. Right. There was always about going and getting this, raiding the stuff and taking it back. Whereas the Western spiritual raiding is, we just run around the world now and grab the practices we want, take them back, and now we're going to do this one and do the next one. So a lot of people are kind of in that kind of world. It's kind of that mentality. They don't realize they're doing it. A lot of those people would be horrified if they thought that they're being the bad guys, that they would see those people as the bad guys, the Westerners rampaging around the world as the bad guys, but that's what they're doing. Just because they're picking and mixing, just because it's from like another culture, doesn't mean that you're not doing the same thing as the guys who just went around and looking for spices or whatever. It's the same thing.
Nutmeg.
So so anyway, so my view on that, though, it's more complex than simply that it's just simply going around raiding, because there is a Western way, and the experimental kind of scientific experimental mindset that's part of the culture. We don't realize, we don't realize it's here really. It finds things and then absorbs them and reintegrates them and appropriates them in its own way and stuff, which is I think what's the process. I think that's what's happening on a large scale at the moment, and it just seems messy. And I'm calling it pick and mix and grab bag of techniques and stuff, but really it's just because everything's so interconnected at the moment. At some point soon, probably it won't be as interconnected, and things might start congealing into more strict ways that appear more like a tradition, and most people are doing it this way rather than it being so random and everyone doing 5 different things than everybody else.
What do you think of this? So maybe a tradition, or following a tradition for a little while, is useful, maybe in the same sense as going to college or trade college or whatever you do is useful. So it's kind of like a way of feeling your way out, kind of like discovering certain things about what a tradition is, and from there you can go and kind of use that however you see fit. Maybe it's good in that respect.
It makes you trapped. It's like in college you learn stuff because you're trapped. Like you're at the thing and you have to do things. You're given time scales. You're given, there's like things that are expected of you that you don't want to do, that you're forced to do. if you want to stay at it, like you. So the tradition's useful for that, because something might be good for you and the master knows this, but you don't want to do it, because part of the reason it's good for you is part of the reason it would be good for you is the reason that you need it, and that's you deciding. You're the problem. So if you're only picking the things you like, you're not going to pick the thing you need. It's like basic stuff. But we forget this when it comes to spiritual things, because you're like, oh, I have this sensation, I have this feeling that this is meant for me, this is my path, and all this really, the kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that the people just lose their minds and don't think rationally where they should. They're so desperate looking for the non-rational and mystical things that they just skip thinking normally about it. It's not even like any kind of hard intellectual study. It's just like being common sense almost, where you realize you speak to someone who knows more than you. They tell you have a deficiency or you should work on this thing, and then you do it, but you don't like doing it. It's hard to do, so you go, oh, but I want a different ecology of practices. I'll try this one now. So that a lot of the people jump around from thing to thing, from modality to modality, treatment to whatever, and just go around in circles and don't get anywhere.
Yeah.
But to be fair, you probably have to do that at some point in your life to realize that that's a problem. Because I did that.
Yeah, me too.
So like I know, it's not like just describing what I did.
You're all
Almost
idiots.
everything I'm talking about here is just my own stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it ties in with this thing. The other problem in the West is this spiritual materialism, which again is like a real danger, particularly with the exotic religions falling into this trap of exoticism. You can really end up looking like a cockhead if you go too far down that path, I think. So yeah, just adopting all the habits, all the terms, adopting the poise, the books, the vocabulary, but also missing the essential point of what that tradition is trying to teach you. I see a lot of it with Buddhism as well. That's kind of the point that I'm talking from. It's a challenging path anyway, but people, as you say, people tend to latch onto the things that they're good at or that they're compelled to become attached to. It could be
one thing they're compelled to is, especially if you're a younger guy and you might not notice, it's very hard to know whether you're interested in that practice and that tradition or learning this thing because of the thing or because you think this is either directly or indirectly the best way to get girls. And also there's ones, like
exactly.
There's many people that go to meditation and yoga and stuff like that. That's why they're going.
Yeah.
They, like how much they're deluding themselves, how much they really know what they're up to, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's many people teaching those things that are just there to get the girls. This is just like, especially in the West. Oh, well, actually, maybe not especially. Maybe it's like that other places.
Man,
there are also people that go
the
join
worst.
mystical groups or secret or places that are, because it's boys they're looking for, not girls.
Yeah.
So it's like the social side of it is always going to be there.
Yeah.
No one is like pure, rational, esoteric, autist, genius type, no matter how many of them exist on Twitter. So you still need to deal with that stuff, and you'll have those motivations all the time. So but for some people, you need those things. You need the interaction. Some people aren't suited to the going to the hat and being solitary for ages doing something.
Yeah,
that would just make them insane. Other people, like those people need to be around people, and they need the tradition because that's the social side of it is part of the process for them. Other people need to get away from all the social stuff and be solitary. It just, like that is just a basic personality thing that affects everything, even normal stuff. If you're trying to write, everyone thinks going away to the jungle and being on your own writing, or going away to, some random place and being completely on your own is when they'll do all the writing and write their book. That's not true at all for many people. You need to be around people when you're writing. You need to be in a busy cafe, or not too busy, but you just can't function when you're on your own too much. I go weird when I'm on my own too much. After a while, my girlfriend will say to me, like, yeah, I haven't spoken to, like, some days, so you've not really spoken to anyone today yet, have you? And I'm like, no, I'm already being weird. But if I'm around people, I can't stand being around them for too long because
Oh
too many
yeah,
people are
man, tell me
too
about
annoying.
it.
You know, it's that kind of
Yeah,
conflict.
yeah, me
So,
too.
but that is happening when you're doing all these practices. You know, that these things are playing out. You're not like, even if you're not thinking about them, you'll find yourself going to something because there's a deeper need and you needed the emotional benefit from being there. And it's got nothing to do with all this rationalizations about I'm doing this psychology practices to become awakened and all that. It's not. It's just you.
Yeah.
You like those people and you want to be around them, which is fine. But it's, you know, it's a different thing.
Yeah, sessions are weird. Like, have you done a silent retreat before, like a Buddhist meditation retreat? Could be any of the modalities. That gets weird.
The longest silent retreat I've done is clicking mute on my microphone here when you speak.
So
no, I haven't done a silent one. No, I've done like sessions, long ones of my own, but I've never gone anywhere where I was expected to be quiet for longer than, you know, an hour or two, I think.
Right. Yeah, let me tell you, the social dynamic when you have to remain silent around people in that state can get pretty fucking strange sometimes. Like, you see like a lot of stuff kind of come up. It's very hard to describe, but yeah, just walking around, not even looking at someone, not talking to them, but they're all around for like 10 days, sometimes 20 days. Like, for the first couple of days, everything intensifies, and you can just tell everyone's a little bit weird and like kind of like they're going through their own shit, and like it gets kind of a bit, I don't know, a bit intense, a bit weird. But towards the end, usually everything tends to chill out, and all those things go away. But I always wondered what that was. And you get confused because you're not sure. Like, is this just me projecting on these people? Like, how much of this is me, and how much of this is really going on? Which is all part of the experience, I'm guessing. Particularly as you don't really
And
know
it
anyone.
could be going on all the time. It's just you're normally thinking of
Not
things to
aware of
say,
it.
so you
Totally.
don't notice it.
Could be that as well. But I think it's an interesting element, and that brings me to this point that I really believe in the Israel Regardie thing, like how he recommended to people before they went into occultism, I think was his thing, or whatever, that they did like some degree of insight practice or psychoanalysis, or of course he was a Reichian therapist, so he attacked it from that angle. And he said that before people go into a religious path, that they should probably spend more time understanding themselves first. Because when you go into the religious path, particularly an esoteric religious path, it really intensify all your character flaws, all the problems you've got, all the things that you're trying to escape, which are going to affect how effective you are at the path itself. So he actually recommended, like, this could be very difficult these days because such people are almost impossible to come across. You'll probably come out of the place transgender or something more likely these days. But I always thought that it was a really compelling idea. And I remember talking to Cal about something similar. And he said that when a lot of people go into and do this kind of self work or psychoanalysis, quote unquote psychoanalysis, which is not really what it is, but some form of insight practice, that what occurs is they realize that they don't really want the religion anymore. They don't feel compelled to go and do the thing that they thought they wanted to do before. So I often wonder, how much is an esoteric path or a religious path even required, particularly if you're not brought up in a religious path and you're just trying them on like jackets. How much of that is driven by, a severe dissatisfaction with yourself that you don't understand, you're not aware of, you've never done any work to uncover why you feel that way. Maybe it's because you're bullied in the schoolyard and you never faced it and you haven't done much with yourself since. There's probably better things you could be doing, like going to the gym or learning some other skill. How much of people pursuing religious paths is driven by psychological malaise that they're unwilling to face? And then once they're on the religious path, how much of that comes up and renders the religious path basically worthless? And I think that is a real problem. Going back to like meditators and girls and all that sort of stuff, there are a number of sex scandals, as I'm sure you're aware of, like Tibetan lamas and Indian yogis, like not just sleeping with women in their sangha, but like actually sexually assaulting them and all sorts of stuff going on, right? So there's this whole element of esoteric practices, and this kind of ties into the whole thing that we're saying. Is going on a path is one thing, but the practices in the path also don't necessarily give you the entirety of the character change that you necessarily desire or want. Whereas really quite pedestrian things could give those things to you. And then you may find that you don't even really care about pursuing religion in that way anymore. But also that many of these esoteric paths and practices in and of themselves, I tend to think they may be somewhat incomplete, or they don't do things to the character as effectively as, say, working on your posture would. So, for example, there's a famous Sam Harris, who I believe is quite a good mindfulness practitioner. I think there's evidence in the stuff that I've read by him that he's fairly learned and he has a pretty good idea. He's secular, which is why most people in our circles hate him because, besides the political elements, obviously. But you can look at some of the stuff he says, which is really, I would have to describe as somewhat delusional. And it really made me think like, okay, well, if this is a result of mindfulness, if this guy's lost the plot to this degree and is really getting attached to all sorts of, political outcomes and abstract political outcomes that may or may not exist in the real world, and he's willing to sacrifice children just to get Joe Biden elected. I mean, all sorts of like pretty nasty fucking stuff that he said. Like, how useful is mindfulness? Is mindfulness the only thing you should do? Mindfulness may make you feel better about things, but what is it missing in the process of understanding your character? And this is kind of the perspective that I come from when I pick and mix, as you say, is that I feel like all these different things are incomplete in and of themselves, pretty much, because there's too many examples of people acting like fools when they're very advanced, they've achieved a lot of things in mindfulness, but they still act in terrible ways. So what is it in that practice that's lacking? Same thing with yoga, same thing with yogis, same thing with Christians. Obviously, we don't need to go there. People still behave like monkeys, having achieved great things in these paths. So what I'm thinking is, in and of themselves, all these different paths must be delinquent in some way or incomplete in some way. And that maybe as Westerners, our great aim is to bring all these different things together and to optimize them, and to also, do like a bit of a Reichian thing or a psychoanalytic thing when we really try to understand the nuts and bolts of character, of why we behave the way that we do. And yeah, just going back to my original point, I feel like in the old days, it would have been psychotherapy when you had like a good psychotherapist that would slap you across the face and really show yourself to yourself. But that being difficult to find, some sort of process where you can go through it and get rid of all those little, like, neurotic hangups and other things that may be driving you towards these practices and these aims. And as I said, you could be a like have the most amazing achievements as a Tibetan Lama. Like, I forget his name. It's, something Rinpoche, but he was infamous for sleeping with his students. And like, he was like some really highly ranked monk that had done like a ton of work. It's probably one of those, I think he like lived in one of those little caves for like 5 years or whatever, the crazy shit they do. And he's there acting inappropriate with women in his Sangha. And he's meant to be like a semi-enlightened being, right? Like,
there's a Zen, I think it's Zen, but there's some kind of Buddhist monk I heard a story about, had a retreat, was living somewhere in Scotland years ago.
Yeah.
And he was like an alcoholic and a cokehead and stuff, as well as still teaching people.
Yeah.
I mean, that might just be what happens when you live in Scotland. I don't know. But it was ridiculous, and then he got like caught up about it later. But so yeah, I think you
see what I'm getting at, though? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
like,
awakenings don't make you a good person necessarily. They just see you see things more clearly, and you make less of the mistakes that you made before, which makes you a better person just in certain ways, just in a practical, matter of fact way, not in a trying to be good way. Because a lot of the bad things people do are just like malfunctions. But it's not going to make someone suddenly be ethical, because you're just going to be, you're just going to be the same. Like, there's like, so if you take Sam Harris, I mean, I haven't read his meditation type stuff, but his understanding of the world is all based around the top part of the brain, basically.
It is very,
so even for somebody who'd be very pro evolution and science and those things when he talks about them, but actually when it comes down to it, he doesn't, like, he's just been spun around like every other animal. by the animal things, and he's been deluding himself and all those things. But you can get very clear using certain practices in certain parts of your mind and body and feelings, but it doesn't mean you've done everywhere else. But if you're living in those areas that have just been cleaned up, you're now blindsided by some weird emotional problem that you've never dealt with. When you, I mean, not some people just get into all the practices because they actually it's therapy they're looking for.
But that's
so
what I mean.
using
Yeah.
the practices to therapize themselves.
So I actually
which is
think
already a danger, because if you're in need of the therapy and now you're in charge of the therapy, you're most likely to go wrong with that. If you're, that's what the point of having someone else who knows more about something than you is.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's the case more often than not in the West. The people that I've come across, they seem to be more in need of like some kind of, and I hesitate to use the word therapy because we all know what that's about nowadays. But at least, in the 70s when Rigatti was talking about it, like you had, people that were a bit more hard about it and a bit harsher, in that traditional psychoanalytic sense. But I guess, given the fact that there aren't really people like that around anymore, I've often thought, like, what's the best way to approach it? Because I do think everyone should go through that. And I do think they should.
For some people, it's becoming a Christian monk, because a lot of monks are dealing with their thing is their path. Actually, what they're doing on a daily basis is they're working to self-overcome like emotional things and stuff and temptation. It's all clothed in religious language, but if you think about it, they're just like overcoming temptations, and the devils and the demons are coming from them. But really, you can just, they're trying to not be ruled by these emotional things. They want to be in charge of them, which is which involves having to have a different concept. You eventually have to have a different concept of yourself in order to overcome these things, because you're identified with those things.
Yeah.
So there's just like different paths for different people. I mean, the hyper intellectual type might need all the systems. The very emotional type might need to just, lock himself in a cell and whip his back with a rope, each to his own.
But do you think, though,
and then other people,
just on that, do you think that that's the most effective way of doing it? Because I really don't. I think that probably it's going to be more likely that you'll just be the same person. You'll just be delusional your entire life. And there's probably much more effective ways of dealing with stuff like that that are not religious or esoteric.
And it's not what I've done. But I mean, there are, I'm sure there's like everywhere else in those places, there's people who are fully awakened in the Buddhist kind of sense, that it's in a different context, so they don't talk about it like that. And there's just as many people who are just wasting their time or they're for social reasons. I don't just mean to be around the people that are there, but also to be away from the other people.
Yeah.
A lot of people join monasteries and stuff to escape other things, and they were on the run or whatever. So like there's many reasons, but that doesn't stop you from them becoming mystical and learning things later. I mean, some of the biggest mystics were like warrior guys first. Like it's not like you can't work with whatever goes on in your life. And for Westerners, I mean, I don't think you need. There's definitely a certain type of person who doesn't need to all the stuff. He doesn't need to pretend that he's a Buddhist and all that stuff, or like he doesn't need to pretend that he's found Christianity again and stuff like that. They can just use the practices and they'll get progress with it. And some of them, maybe it's just like they don't even care at all about any of the stuff. They're just, because they're doing something, it's like much more practical, goal orientated way of living. So it's not really noticeable because they don't want to just sit in their underwear at the side of the road. So the skulls are
no Westerner really does.
They're like doing something anyway. They might be just being an inventor. A guy's an inventor. We just see a guy, he's very materialistic. He's trying to make these machines. A guy could be completely awakened and he's just like, that's his thing. It's like he's just expressing all of the levels of himself. And it's just that's the right thing for him to do. We don't know. And it's self-selecting. The people who get interested in the stuff are already either a weirdo or they're doing it for some emotional traumatic need that they have to get involved in this, or they have to feel superior because they do this cool thing, or it's just it's complicated.
So my theory, and this ties in again. I think I've kind of mentioned this, but it ties in with this picking and choosing element of the Westerner that we're talking about. But my theory is that many of these esoteric practices in these traditions are kind of like a psychological technology. This is the way I'm framing it, particularly like in my own work. And a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, when they're used in such a way, can be very effective in untying knots in people, like untying these psychological hangups and psychological knots. For example, I went through with Calvin, and then I really insist with people that I do a little bit of work with, that the no self process is a Buddhist process, but it's actually, in a way, it's a very sophisticated technology that allows people to just pretty much all at once let go of all their hang-ups if they go through the process properly. Because the realization of there being no inherent self is not just a Buddhist realization. It's not something you go through Buddhism and then the Buddhism creates a Buddhist no self experience. It is literally an exercise that's just there to point out the reality of the fact that there is no fixed contraction that is a self. But the implications of that realization is a freeing up of energy, and over time, the undoing of certain knots, neurotic tendencies, hang-ups, which in a way could also be considered therapeutic or pseudo-therapeutic, because it frees up energy for that person then to go and do things that they would never have been capable of doing before.
Yes,
like,
therapeutic side effects.
Yeah,
It's like, because you said you get rid of all the hang-ups at once. So like a person listening who's like in the therapy mindset would think that's impossible. How can you deal with all these emotions all at one time? But because you're not dealing with the emotions, what you're doing is you're changing the underlying way of being, the underlying relationship, understanding of relationship between subject, object, those things.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things just unravel or fade away once you change the underlying way you're approaching them. Like if you're just getting attached to everything, so you can suddenly lose a lot of your issues at one go because it wasn't therapy you were doing, but you've had all these therapeutic side effects.
Yeah, and it is also the case that I think that not all esoteric technologies, if you want to call them that I've practiced, and I've practiced quite a few at this point, they don't all have the same effect. So some things are more sophisticated than others, and some things definitely have a more tangible, noticeable impact on people. There's not necessarily a religious impact. And again, I always go back to the breathing thing, the hara breathing. That is technically a Japanese postural breathing technique that Buddhist monks use. But having tested it with my metric gear here, with all sorts of biometrics, I also notice that it is incredibly effective at completely changing people's physiology, completely changing the way the blood flows through their circulatory system. It has all these other impacts that have downstream impacts on mentality, character, personality, just general day-to-day experience. But I think there's also other practices that may not be so useful, in a therapeutic sense, or have a therapeutic, or how would you say, an effective therapeutic edge to them. I think there's ones that are less effective. So the way I'm viewing things personally, and the work that I'm engaged in, is trying to put together, I know you're the same, right? Is trying to put together how all these, which practices are very effective, which ones are not so effective, which ones are quick and efficient and direct ways to achieve these aims, which things are not effective, not particularly direct, and don't particularly, they're not efficient, which is a lot of things like that. And putting them all together in this kind of general framework of physiological, like a general physiological framework of self change. And some things are good for that, some things are less good for that. Because I guess what I've done is, going back to what I was saying before, is I've taken what I seek, so the definition of what I seek, I've taken the time to define what I'm seeking from these things. And therefore, when I go through to pick and choose which one's effective and which one's not, things become a lot easier. Well, I'm like, well, I can sit in, Vipassana, noting body sensations for 40 years, or I could just go to a, Tibetan Lama, learn some pointing exercises, see that there's no self, and be done relatively quickly. So which one are you going to choose, right? Like, those two technologies are not necessarily the same. They emphasize different things. And one is highly efficient. It's very direct. The other one less so. So for me, in defining what I see as the ultimate goal, which is overcoming myself consistently, quickly and efficiently, and helping other people to overcome the things that ail them. This is not medical advice, so I'm not really seeking to do that. I'm just teaching breathing. But for that purpose, there's actually quite a narrow subset of things that I would consider to be worthwhile. And they all come from religious paths, but I wouldn't necessarily therefore recommend the religious path itself unless someone was inclined to do so. So I guess that's an example of what I mean.
You're approaching it from your own framework, is like which I think is the uniquely Western approach to
exactly
practices done right. Is like something we were messaging about on Twitter. You were saying, we're talking about the fact that you're using the biofeedback machines, I'm using the video, and we're kind of looking at the same events that people are doing. For you're doing breathing, I'm doing posture movement, and we're looking at the same events from two different ways. We're looking at it from the subjective point of view of what it's like inside the person and what they're thinking and doing, feeling at the time, and then also looking at it from the objective point of view. You're using the feedback. There's a person breathing, and then you're looking at the results in the machine after, and then you're doing the breathing again. So you're going from the whole lived life, the whole lived experience, right brain, to the left brain, where you're analyzing the stats, the data and stuff, and then you're going back to the whole lived experience again. I'm the exact same thing. It's the movements, postural movements and movement experiments, and then you're analyzing the video, very analytical left brain, and then back to the whole lived experience of working on your movements in normal life. So the fact that we both use the objective, scientific, experimental feedback mechanisms that are like the middle part of the process, the technologies, like literal physical technologies, that begins over time to like this is what you said in the message. It replaces the master, so the pupil now starts using the tools. We start using the tools to give you the feedback that in the tradition the master gives you the feedback. So you go to a tradition, you do the practice. Some guy who knows more tells you things that you don't know. He's saying that he's recognizing patterns in what you're saying and doing, and he can tell you things. So that's where you go for the objective point of view. Then you're back to your own subjective point of view of working on yourself, and then you go to the objective point of view, whether you're chatting to the monk, your daily chat or weekly chat or whatever it is. So for us, the Western approach is we're using our technologies, which is the Western. Technology is the Western thing. It's like the Western culture. This high technology. So we're using those to gradually to act as the master. I mean, this is a dangerous thing to have technology as master if you're not bringing it back to the whole lived, quote, right brain experience like we are. So we're not getting lost in the data and the details. That's not the end. You're just using that to understand more about the actual living behaviors after. So this happens slowly, because in the beginning you're deluding yourself. The reason we're using the objective tools to measure things is in order to prevent yourself deluding yourself. It's not simply to get more information, because that's what it seems like. I get more info and then got more data, and then I can work with the data now. It's more really is to go, oh, I thought I was doing this thing, but why is this doing that? This is saying that. This other thing, according to this, my heart was doing this thing, but it didn't seem like that. Okay, so I didn't notice at the time. So you learn more, and then over time, the what you learn that's abstract and analytical with the tool starts kind of filtering into your kind of unconscious or intuitive understanding, and the two things begin to align each other. To me, this is a very Western way of doing it, because it's individualistic, because you're in charge of yourself, which is Western's way more individualistic than the Eastern, obviously. And it's like technology is the main part, but you're not getting controlled by the technology, which is the big technocratic mistake, where they're just what we're calling the middle phase. They think can just run it by itself and come up with all the goals and decisions and aims by itself, which is just absurd. There's a lot of this conceptual mistakes in the AI discussions at the moment.
Rife. Right.
But it's just part of this process. And McGilchrist's book from last week is really useful for this way of thinking about it. It's he's talking about the right hemisphere way of doing things, then to the left, and then back to the right, and then the right hemisphere's understanding will be more enriched and larger than it was before, without the analytical left part as the middle stage of the process. I like to think about in postures, you're going from the whole to the parts, back to the whole. Most of the people working on the posture stuff focus on either just the parts of the whole. You'll go to a doctor or the medical guys, it's all different parts and how the different mechanisms work, and it's like they treat you like a car, fix different parts and then it'll work fine. Whereas and then you get other people who are doing like the embodiment type of practices, where they try to feel the whole all at once and have this higher feelings and stuff, and they're ignoring the parts really. So you have to go from the whole to the parts, back to the whole. So I just think that's where I think the Western approach to all this stuff is unique. It's this kind of technical approach, while technical approach, experimental approach, but not you don't need to necessarily believe anything. This is the key thing, because
absolutely,
it's hard to take on a practice if you have to just believe stuff that you don't actually believe, because now you're setting up this whole conflict in your mind where you're pretending to believe these things because you feel you need to in order to do that practice, which is what you were saying earlier.
It's laughing. You can't believe in a Tibetan fucking deity. I mean, I bet the Tibetans don't even believe in it anymore. You got like some guy from like California walking around invoking, some wrathful deity from the Himalayas. It just seems crazy to me.
And especially since in the old days, it used to be that was the gods for one group of people in one place. Other people had their own gods. So it's kind of weird.
It is weird.
It's weird. Must be weird, like bizarre to them. I mean, I don't know how they feel about a lot of it, but that's just the reverse of the process where all the countries are just taking on all the Western high technology and just implanting it into the middle of a culture, and weird things are happening, and it's like it doesn't work the same way as it works here, because it's just different, I mean, one of the most esoteric practices in the West that no one even realizes was the birth of science, experimental method. That was like heavily intertwined with like magic and alchemy religion at the time.
Who was it? Like
Alchemy
Francis
and
Bacon,
apocalypticism. Like Francis Bacon. It was like everyone thought that, and John Dee. They all thought that end of the world was imminent, but they were like running to quickly be scientific as possible in the last days and stuff. So like and then that developed into, we just like science technology now we just take for granted, but that's our one. It's hidden in plain sight.
So speaking of, like, I'm gonna get a bit esoteric now, but I was thinking like, well, part of this work is trying to help people and trying to make their lives a bit better, I guess. But like in terms of a great aim, I was thinking, well, there's no reason, like, if you were to envisage some future some excellent future, a future of like expansion, of possibilities. I guess in a not a transhumanist way, but like humanity getting off Earth, doing something better, whatever that's going to be. Like I don't know, something like June or whatever people have in their minds. Um, it's going to require. I really honestly think it's going to require some sort of technology like this, technologies like what we've been discussing, because one of the things that's holding us back is I firmly believe is our physiology and our understanding of our brains. Like we have a real problem in our history of being able to self-determine as individuals and groups. And I think this is what's getting in the way, is because and this may be extremely naive, but we just keep getting in the way of ourselves, and we go through these cycles and then we lose everything. And a lot of it I think is probably avoidable, with a lot of this stuff. And I'm not optimistic on this happening, but I do like the idea of having like an ultimate vision or an ultimate aim for, say, something like what we're trying to do. So not just helping you out with your posture or whatever, but developing kind of like well, I guess a school of thought, a school of physiological practice or mindfulness practice combined with a certain kind of intellectual outlook. Personally, I like the Nietzschean outlook. I really appreciate that. I haven't read Spengler yet. I got it here actually waiting to go after McGilchrist. I can't believe I haven't read it yet, but it's quite embarrassing. But I
And just
like,
for anyone listening, those are two big books that are good to go together.
yeah,
Ian McGilchrist, Master and His Emissary, and Spengler, Decline of the West. They overlap in a big chunk, but there actually is a big difference between them as well, which
yeah,
we maybe talk about another time.
yeah,
But
yeah, sure. So what do you think
sorry,
about this idea of like a grand overarching vision or goal to this work, to this framework that we're trying to put together? Because I just don't believe, I don't believe reading's going to work. I don't believe necessarily technology is going to work. It's going to require the operator of these things to fundamentally change what it is to be able to entertain the futures that are possible, or to hold the future on the shoulder of the species, is going to require some fundamental change in the organism, or the change of the way that we look at ourselves. And I think that the way that happens has to be through methods like this. That's my fundamental, not belief. I guess it's a belief. And I'm directing my energies in a small way. I'm not saying like I'm some prophet or something, but just in my own little small way, with my own little contribution. It's that vision that's kind of driving me, in a
yeah, I think
large
what we're
way.
doing here is we're kind of fleshing out the conceptual framework, the approach for looking at these things, which
Yeah.
is different from anything really I've heard. I haven't really heard anyone talk about this stuff before.
No.
Like this way, they say you should write the book write the book you want to read that no one's written before.
Yeah.
This is the podcast I wanted to hear. I've
Mm.
never heard people talk about this stuff before, years ago. And maybe they are now, but if anyone knows anyone, send me the stuff. But yeah, so it's like having the approach, and then you do need like a suite of techniques. You do need the ecology of practices if you're looking at it from this framework, because you different people have different issues, but also different times you need a different approach at different times. Sometimes you just need to alternate between things. You definitely need other people though, because as much as I was talking about the technology becoming your kind of using it as a sort of master, well, I'm making this complicated. I don't mean in the Ian McGilchrist sense. I just mean using the technology to get feedback so you can slowly become your own master. Is that's you want to do that, but you're going to delude yourself and make mistakes, and having someone else who
Mm.
knows more about that thing is useful. So when you say like a school, so school of thought and literally school of people learning together is essential in some ways, because some things you just can't do on your own yet, or somebody will save you 10 years of wasting your time with a comment or a quick analysis of something you're doing. And you can definitely just live out the same patterns and habits for years without realizing it, for way longer than you want to feel comfortable imagining.
Sure.
That can be removed quickly by somebody, help to remove quickly. But at the end of the day, yeah, it has to be you, the person. You have to change your well, at the same time, you have to change your mystical and biological understanding and relationship with the world. People tend to focus on one or the other. They tend to be very physical based and and very materialistic on that and work on that side of things, or they tend to be just a bit too far out there. They're either stuck on the ground or their head is in the clouds. Really, you need to have your feet on the ground with your head in the clouds.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think this kind of driving goal, that's the way forward. I don't see any other way forward. I wrote about it actually in the essay the other day.
So, what do you see as the goal, the driving goal?
Well, this idea of expansion, this idea of um, quality, increasing quality rather than quantity, um, in the human species itself. Without going into too much detail, and the ability for the animal to overcome its cognitive and physiological limitations by arresting control of them, by consciously directing them in order to break through those unconscious mechanisms that tend to hold us back as a species and definitely as individuals. And I think that maybe.
So would you say it's becoming conscious,
It's
but in a real way?
in
So
a
not like let's all conscious evolution be more
no, yeah,
conscious. It's like
not nonsense like that.
really
No,
is in a real,
yeah, real tangible materialist.
measurable way if you had tools, but also experientially, and we know people. The great thing about traditions and practices, we know people have done this stuff before.
Sure.
You in different places, they're talking about the same thing from different angles, so it's a real thing that's physiologically possible as well as intellectually or consciously possible, and it's real because it takes work.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't just decide one day to wake up, you don't just decide one day to totally change your breathing physiology. You can't, and you can decide and then get to work. You can't just decide and it happens.
No.
This
You
is why
can't read about
affirmations
it,
are
but it
so
happens
popular.
either. Yeah. I went a bit off the rails there. Sorry, but it does tie into the discussion because, as I was saying before, you have religions that have a logical endpoint, enlightenment, blah blah blah, whatever it is. So then, what are we doing as Westerners? What's the point of all this? Like, what is the end goal? And I felt like that was an important question to wrestle with a little bit on a personal level, because otherwise, why not just what is it? Nest, digest, and congest. If there's literally no end goal or no idea of human potential, what's the point then? Just go and sit on
This
the
is what
side of a
most
road.
people are doing, though. Will always be doing. It's going to be a few people drug
For sure.
everyone forward, directly or indirectly, or they might not know. It might not probably won't happen when they're alive. It's like it's just going to. I mean, I like the idea. You need to like the difference in the West. Like to go back to that again. I mean, the Western idea. You're saying about expansion. This is like Spengler's thing. The difference between the West's central idea is infinite space. So it's about expanding in all directions and not being tied down to one thing. Whereas the classical is different, and but the Indian, so obviously the Buddhas from that culture, is about life as their central idea is life as a dream, so that you're escaping the dream is enough, and like you're escaping the dream or versions of that, or realizing it's a dream. That's the end goal. It's like built into the culture. Whereas ours, that doesn't really make you satisfied. Okay, cool. Wake up and now what? A Westerner would say, okay, I'm enlightened. Now what?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
So like we need to be doing something with it. That constant drive to be out. It's like it's our ancestors in the huge forest, driving through the forest, driving, but going through the forest. Everything's just expansive and huge, and reaching the sea and just getting in boats and going out to sea, and just like now it's the spaceships in space. It's just like just that restless driving, expanding outward motion. So for us, that has to be in there somewhere, along with the sort of the more kind of personal, spiritual evolution.
Yeah. People have probably accused me of being materialist, but my idea of material is a lot different to other people. That may be a materialist view, say, compared to, as you were saying, like the dream like quality of the Buddhist view of reality. But I don't. Material is not dead, inert matter, like Richard Dawkins would say, and it's not the same as someone, some loony who's in a spiral dynamics or something would say. Like I'm just in the middle. I don't really consider that like materialistic, that drive. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It gets criticized a lot, but I don't think there's anything wrong with technology. I don't think there's anything wrong with the pursuit of space. And I just I don't see that there's anything inherently wrong with material either. Material gets a bad rap, like people abuse material. They often level. I think it was Alan Watts that said that people consider America to be a materialist culture, but they seem to hate material. They make things cheaply. They throw it out. They have this whole system of kind of throwaway capitalism, which really isn't showing material any respect at all. I think there's a real spiritual quality to material, which is why I don't like it when people diminish so-called material aims in such a way, because it's not how I view material.
No, we need both, and like
absolutely.
If there's any kind of way forward for Western people, it has to include both, because you just simply won't get enough people through the door to pay your bills.
Yeah.
If you make it too much, you'll just get a certain type of person who's escapist types, or people in need of therapy, like seriously in need of actual therapy and stuff like that, rather than someone who's I wrote an essay about this a while ago, dysfunctional weirdos versus functional weirdos. You want the people who are functional in the world and they're doing things and they want to do things and they just need like a bit of help, or they just want to progress to the next stage for them, evolve, self-evolution, you call it that. And it's just a never-ending thing. And it's like a deep need for lots of people. And like the things we're doing are just plug into that need. And I think what we're talking about here is trying to make our view of this and our goals with it even part of a bigger thing, because it already is, instead of it just being like solutions to problems. Oh, you have this problem, this solution. They're just like, it's much more than that. It's much bigger than that. But people only turn up and give you the money when they think you're going to solve a specific problem. This is the infinite dilemma.
Yeah, it is. It is. Which, it could partly be due to the fact that no one's really, well, I guess some people do. Like, you have people like Tim Leary or some of those kind of futurist kind of guys did define something like that. I think maybe part of the problem is no one's defined it. So in a way, we're kind of just flailing around without any grand aim. So yeah, people are going to come to you and they're going to be like, well, I can't sit up straight, or I can't breathe, or, whatever it is, and because maybe we've never really defined those terms for people. It's not immediately clear.
Right, yeah.
We know that it is. We know.
Yeah,
but,
they have a framework of concepts that breathing, for example, is is in a certain category. It's like a mechanical function that you just need to get right so you can get on with the rest of your life. They kind of think of it like it's just what, oh, that part's not working right for me. Or, there's these, oh, I know there's these things you can do and you can make that part a bit better, work a bit better, whatever.
Yeah.
Or upgrade that part. So there's that kind of mentality, whereas really breathing is like very few things is so
essential,
like intimate and central.
Yeah.
And it's it will be changed. It's like not only is it affecting a cause that's affecting other things that are going on physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, but it's also being affected by those things. It's like it's in the middle of everything or central to things. So you like to that's the like the bad one of the bad things in the West is that kind of it's the problem solving.
It's optimization culture.
Optimization mentality. You have breathing problem. Breathing problem X. Here's solution X.
I'm Andrew Huberman. Here's science, where we discuss science. Fucking
so like
this annoys me.
I mean, this is part of the whole issue that we're talking about is like people are in the West are it is part of the reason that the traditions, people are attracted to traditions because they have more than just a solution to them. They're like it seems to have it all sorted out, and then it's like opens up into a bigger thing than where they are currently, which is true for most of them. So and then the practices are integrated in with that, but we're at the stage where we're having to find and integrate practices with where we are already, which is a culture that kind of lost all of these practices that just aren't as normal. Still kind of a weirdo thing. So it's much more. I mean, when I first got into all this stuff, it was like a weirdo thing you didn't really mention. You didn't mention online and stuff. Like you went to websites and things where people are interested in these things, but you didn't like talk about it. You wouldn't talk about it openly in social media. Not really.
No way. Yeah.
It's much more open now, and it's more normalized now than it was. I think people forget how much of it was. It's like the esoteric has become much more exoteric now.
Yeah. Yeah. You had all the what was it, the Satanist scares during the the 90s? Was it Reagan, the Reagan era? They had all that. I think I was a bit young to see it, but yeah, people do forget that it wasn't always out in the open necessarily. That's for sure.
And also, there is actually the actual weirdos who get into stuff first. It's like the crazy people who are the ones that first travel around the world on their own when there's no connections, and like no crazy necessarily people who do things like that. So the first, it's either like the very open-minded, curious people go out looking for these things and bring them back, or it's the psychopaths who are going out looking for less restricted places in order to do their thing, or it's like so it's to be expected that most people will think anyone doing strange things like this, there's something weird or wrong about them. But because it's all coming in more, and this is one of the dangers for people in the West at the moment, is there's so many different practices. Most of them, a lot of them don't really do much, but a few of them are really pretty powerful. And if you just start doing it without any idea of what will come later, you can really mess yourself up.
Yeah.
Because the tradition will cover this, and they have ways of dealing with it. Even the Zen guys kind of ignoring all the weird shit that happens.
Yeah.
Or just like, that's their way. They have a method. Whereas if you're left on your own, you probably won't do that. You'll get fascinated and obsessed over little things that they'll just kind of would probably just roll their eyes at. It's just like child's play to them. But to you, it's the most important spiritual experience of your life, and everything changes now. And now I'm a awakened spiritual being, and now I must tell everybody on Twitter. But then after a while, you realize, oh no, I'm just the same fucking idiot underneath. I just had an experience, the same guy.
Yeah.
So then you're trying other stuff, and then something happens, and you're like, oh no, this actually has changed in some way. Not what I expected, but it's definitely something real has happened, and you're getting somewhere. And then you then over time you start to recognize, you kind of an intuitive understanding of who's got the way they talk about, who's got the thing that really does that and does things and does them quickly that you can trust, and who's just it's some either waste of time or it's something that takes too long, or you just know you don't need that, so you don't get involved.
Yeah. And who's trying to fuck the students? Yeah, tradition. There you go. It's 2 hours of tearing down tradition, and not tearing it down, I guess, but rationalizing it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I don't think I tore it down. I think it was
yeah.
I respect a lot of it, and it's it's like a lot of the stuff I'm doing came from somewhere like that.
Yeah.
It didn't, some things didn't, or more recent, but a lot of other things very old.
So what I'm getting out of this is,
And it was guys like us that were doing these things. People forget
totally.
this. It was just guys like us that started doing all these things,
Mm.
and then they somebody clicked on something, or they connected with something higher, or however you want to think about it. It doesn't matter. And then it just became something. So it's just some old guy, and a thing happened after it. And now, with hindsight, we're looking back to those guys, but we can't see that it's just a guy. We can't see that clearly because there was so much structure and history in a way.
Mythology.
It's just like, it's just a guy on their version of Twitter going, "We need to do some new thing. This is not working."
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me in this discussion is really defining what you're trying to do. Even in the tradition, if you want to pursue a tradition, is like, what am I here for? What, and maybe looking at like, why am I here? Why am I driven to do this? And then if you're picking and choosing different techniques and practices, maybe examine, why are you doing it? What are you trying to achieve with this thing? What's its utility? Is it worth the trouble? Could I get that thing more easily in a more stock standard way? They're all important considerations. Having said that, as I said, I still kind of operate in a tradition, kind of. I'm heretical. I'm not a particularly good Buddhist person. But it's something to hold on to. That's what I like about it. It's something to hold on to. And it does give you, as you were saying, when weirder stuff happens, it gives you something to hold on to, which I think is important as well for people. But maybe when you hit some degree of maturity, then picking and choosing things because you've defined what it is you're after becomes much easier. And in that respect, maybe it's a good idea to start somewhere in a tradition of some kind. But yeah, as you were saying before, I just can't believe any of it. I can't. I don't even believe in enlightenment as such anymore. Not in the mystical way that people put it. I believe that you can foster a non-dual awareness and become, as they say, fully cooked. But the way that people describe enlightenment, I don't even believe in that. I don't even think I think it's been steeped in mystical language, and I think people have lost all sight of what maybe the Buddha was getting at originally. It's my theory.
The way that people have exaggerated what it means, that you become this perfect moral being and you're this superior light form and all this stuff. It's actually preventing more people from having those experiences of evil, from reaching those stages. It's prevented people because they're looking for things that aren't there. It's much more matter of fact than they probably think in some ways. And yeah, I mean, you'll notice we've talked about this roundabout ways for a few episodes now, and usually avoiding the E word because it gives people the wrong idea, and just saying really clumsy things like the understanding of the relationship between the subject, object, all that stuff, which I hate saying all of it. But I mean, that was the goal for me. It was like I didn't know what it was. There's some breakthrough into something. Not really clear what it was, and I wasn't. I didn't really have a kind of romantic view of it. Of it's like, or I didn't want to be. I think I did want to be the perfect wise sage man, but I don't think it was like I wasn't really wanting wasn't really an escapism thing for me. It was more I wanted more rather than to get away from something. I wanted more here rather than to be someone else, and just over time, it just like the big split that we have between mind and body, between psychological and physical, especially in the West. Over time, with doing all these practices and thinking about it more, you realize the split resolves itself. You kind of overcome the split. You don't solve it. You just overcome it, and things are seen in a different way. And it's just everything else is just better after that.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, that's a good way to finish.